are listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside.
This episode of Rootbound is brought to you by Autumn. Do you love falling leaves, pumpkins, and rainy weather? If you answered yes, then you will simply fall. See what I did there? For autumn! Autumn! It's orange as heck.
Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth.
I'm glad you came back, Sally. Let's just sit here in this pumpkin patch and you'll see the great pumpkin with your own eyes.
Two roads diverged, and I took the ones traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
My name is Steve. We all live on a farm. If you've never lived on a farm, you might wonder what it's like. And that's the reason for my story. A story about autumn on the farm.
My name actually is Steve, but I do not live on a farm. Thank you for listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside. Each week on this show, I invite a guest who tells me about a plant that means something to them, and then I tell the guest about a plant that means something to me, and through this process, we all learn more about plants and learn more about each other. But this is one of the special episodes where we don't talk about just a single plant or two plants. We talk about the concept of a season and plants in general, and I have more than one guest. So this is the fall special, if you didn't know already. And with that, let's just get right into it and meet our guests for this fall special episode of Rootbound. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fall or autumn special of Rootbound. This is one of those episodes where we don't have just one guest. And unlike normal episodes where I don't do the introductions till the end, on this episode we do the introductions at the beginning. So first of all, we have Rebecca from the Elderflower episode. Say hi.
Hi.
And also, as always, on these special episodes, my wife, Karla.
Hello.
And today we're going to talk about plants and the season of fall in general. We've all going to share some various fun facts, dazzling details, anecdotes, and we're sitting in front of a little chimenea that we have in our yard, and I'm, during this whole time, going to be making tortillas because we're going to have a quesadilla party shortly after. So if you hear lots of moving around, that's what's happening. I'm making corn tortillas. So let's just get started. Rebecca, what do you have to say about plants and fall?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love fall, as many people do. And I guess the first plant tidbit I wanted to bring up is pumpkins. Pumpkins, they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
There's so many pumpkins. People paint pumpkins, carve pumpkins, blah blah blah. So I just have a personal experience with growing pumpkins. We started composting in our yard a couple years ago, and we're very lazy about it. We just kind of like throw stuff in the back, and sometimes we stir it up. And then, so eventually I noticed one of the cool things about composting is that you get volunteer plants sometimes.
Yes.
If you're a lazy composter. Like
Indeed.
Yeah, so we started to get some sprouts coming out of our compost, and eventually I figured out that a lot of them were pumpkin sprouts. And so I did some rudimentary research on growing pumpkins, and I took a couple of the sprouts that looked pretty good and moved them on the sunniest side of our house and just let them grow to see what would happen. So then throughout the summer, like, the vines get huge. I was definitely not, I was just like, let's see, but they're huge. Yep. They like explode out of the little, we had a little rectangle kind of cornered off, and we kept having to adjust their position so they didn't overflow into our neighbor's yard.
Yeah, you try to lift them up, and they have these little tendrils that stick.
They reach into the earth, yeah. Right? So we kind of move them around a little bit, and my husband mowed around them because we were like, let's see what they do. So they were so huge. It was really fun to watch them. And then the flowers came out. The flowers started to come in the summer. and these big, like huge, gorgeous blooms. They're really awesome. So I was like, oh, great. I got some flowers. We're going to get some pumpkins. This is going to be awesome. But then these flowers kept falling off and they didn't produce pumpkins. So I was like, what's going on? So I talked to my friend, Anna, who I knew she had grown pumpkins before. And so she told me about the whole male flower and female flower thing. So pumpkins are really interesting. They have both male and female flowers on the same plant. And the first flowers that are produced are the male flowers. And then after this online source said about 2 weeks, which sounds about right. After about 2 weeks, the female flowers will start to come. And then sometimes, so my friend recommended, she was like, they don't always get pollinated on their own because sometimes there's not enough bees. So I went out with my little Q-tip and I, sang some Marvin Gaye to myself and I, took I figured out how to identify, obviously, that the male flowers have those stamens. And then you take the pollen from the stamen and you take it over to the pistil on the female flower and rub it all over there. And then the female flowers also have this like tiny immature fruit at the base.
Yeah, that's a fun thing about pumpkins is you can very clearly tell the difference between the male and female flowers, which is not always, I think, as obvious.
Yeah.
But I when I was first reading about it, it's like the female flowers actually look like they're a little pregnant.
Yes.
They have a little bump.
They're like a
bump.
little bitty.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But even then, like the male flowers, I was like, there's a rounded thing at the bottom. Is that the fruit? No.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then I pollinated. And then happily we ended up getting one big pumpkin that was big enough to carve. We made a great jack-o'-lantern with my 2-year-old. Or no, she was 3. I think she was 3 by then. And then we had little tiny ones too, because I didn't really know what kind of pumpkins they would be.
Yeah, I'm
So
going to
some of
jump
them
in here.
were
Don't
tiny.
spoil this because at the end of the episode, we're going to get the breakdown from your daughter Maya about exactly what happened with these pumpkins.
Correct.
No spoilers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
but it's some excellent podcasting from a 5-year-old shortly.
Yes, that's right. But yeah, so that's that was fun. It was just cool. It felt like playing, which is the thing that I love about like gardening for me is just like, let's see what happens. Yeah. I'm very, it's like cool.
Now, do you think the
Sometimes it works
pumpkins
well.
were like from the jack-o'-lantern from the year before?
Yes.
Oh,
it definitely
so they were
was.
like a big,
Yes.
big
Yes.
orange jack-o'-lantern?
Because we just, threw all our stuff. So then this time with the pumpkin that we grew, we actually took the seeds out and roasted them. Oh, nice. And then we did not get pumpkin sprouts again because we were like, growing them is kind of a big undertaking.
This is the first
You have
year.
to have a lot of space.
This is the first year I haven't done pumpkins. I tried to plant them. It was too late this year, so there's some tiny plants and they won't make it. But last year they just completely covered the yard.
Yeah.
And we have a variety. There's actually one from last year out here on the edge. There's a couple actually that we decided that they're probably a little bit too old now, and we're kind of using them as jack-o'-lanterns. But this is a variety called the Seminole pumpkin. It's from Florida.
Yeah.
And this is the large fruited variety, but it is just so prolific. Like we had so many pumpkins last year, and they also are very shelf stable.
Yeah,
So
I was
we
going to say
actually,
that's
I mean,
a
this
long
one we
time
probably
to have
could
it.
still eat it probably, but we
Okay.
did have one. There's one in the fridge from the same batch that we ate last week, and so it's a really cool variety if you want looking for a pumpkin called that is like very shelf stable. The Seminole pumpkin I highly recommend, and it's this kind of pale yellow, looks a little bit
it's
color of a
pretty.
butternut, but it's like pumpkin shaped. Actually, there's 2 varieties. The normal variety is really small, and they actually climb trees and can like hang from trees apparently.
Cool.
But this one's a little bit bigger, a bigger fruited variety. So I'm forgetting about my tortillas here. Okay, we're good. They're not burning too much. Yeah, pumpkins are fun. They're such a great sign of fall because they're one of those, such an obvious crop that's ready. I mean, fall is a harvest time.
Right,
But pumpkins,
exactly.
like, everything starts turning brown and then you're just left with these big orange things in the field,
And that's what happened too. Like the vine around it just turned brown and kind of, but then it was pumpkin time. It's pretty cool.
That's so fun.
I have one other thing that I harvested from my yard, which
Oh.
is not a pumpkin, but it is one of our late harvest figs from our fig tree.
Lovely.
There's only one because, we just cannot stop ourselves from eating them. And actually, we didn't get that many late ones. But this one somehow survived, we had a frost, I think, and it, there's a couple still hanging on that we're hoping that we'll get.
So cool.
So I'm going to cut it up for you guys.
Wonderful. I love figs, and I'm next year I'm gonna grow a fig. That's my goal. A neighbor has one, but so that looks lovely. It's a really nice color, that fig. It's like a dark green. Lovely. Looking forward to tasting this. Karla, do you have some any thoughts about fall and plants?
Well, I actually just wanted to jump on the whole pumpkin conversation. It was I just thought it was I love pumpkins just as a fruit, generally speaking, and just also as decoration. But I find it interesting that it's such a big sign of fall. And it's native to North America. All pumpkins are native to North America, so I find it interesting that it's also combined with different cultures. How jack-o'-lanterns are carved, but all that whole tradition came from Europe, from the Ireland and so on. But I looked into that, and it looks like since they didn't have pumpkins when that whole tradition of carving things, and I guess they used to carve turnips, which is a lot more difficult, or other smaller vegetables.
Hard.
Yeah.
Not as spooky somehow.
Not as or maybe spookier.
Well,
it depends.
sure.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. But it's
Did you say Ireland?
Ireland.
Ireland. I imagine the first Irish settler who saw pumpkins this is the stuff. This is what I should be carving a face into.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot easier because pumpkins are a lot larger, especially the big orange ones are a lot larger than turnips and other. I forget what other root vegetable was used for carving, but yeah. So I thought
that's really funny. Also, I guess it was a big innovation because pumpkins are hollow on the inside for putting the candle in them, which you can't really do with a turnip as well, or you got to hollow out the turnips. Before we start on those figs, which look lovely, I just want to point out that I'm going to pour this a little bit by my mic so people hear. We're having some elderberry mead, which if you remember on the episode that Rebecca was on, we had elderflower mead. So that was the early version of this, but this is the made from the berries, and it has a nice red color. It looks almost like a light red wine, and it's quite tasty. So that's what we're enjoying. And I'm going to grab one of those figs before we continue on here.
And then I also just wanted to mention, since we're talking about fall, another super typical fall thing is the changing of the leaf color. And so one thing that I found interesting is that you see these vibrant colors like oranges, reds, yellows, still a little bit of green in North America. And you also see that in Asia, all of this, different colors. But in Europe, apparently, most of the trees are just they turn yellow. And that's it. So I don't really think people understand exactly why that is. But I thought that was interesting.
I have a little insight on that. I don't know why, but I did read about why the leaves turn the color. And what happens is that in the fall, the tree is trying to store all of its energy and resources in the roots.
Sure.
So it starts pulling the chlorophyll back
from
the leaves into the roots. Yep. But it's what's left behind are other compounds that have the color. And one interpretation is that this is the leaf's true color. It's what happens when you pull the chlorophyll away. And there are two classifications of compounds in Karla. You can maybe have some insight. It says you're the chemist. But one are carotenoids, which are the oranges and yellows.
That's right.
Okay. And then anthocyanins, which are the purples and reds.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
But I guess Europe maybe is lacking on the anthocyanins for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah.
So the type of trees, I guess.
It might be the type of trees, yeah.
But that is interesting. Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. But as you said, I think certainly the other compounds are present. I'm not sure about the anthocyanins, but certainly the carotenoids are present together with the chlorophyll. And then as soon as the chlorophyll starts to, kind of move back, then the oranges and the yellows really start to pop. and the leaves. But I thought that was interesting. I don't know about the anthocyanins. I have to do a little bit more research.
Yeah, like why
into
certain
that.
trees have anthocyanins
And the other ones
and they
don't.
don't. Like so, red maple turns really red.
Yeah.
But the silver maple, which is this in my yard,
It's
actually is
yellow.
only yellow. The tall one is a silver maple. And so, what's the difference? Why are those there?
It's a huge maple. Yeah.
Yeah, Rebecca's saying it's a huge maple. Yes, that's the one I make syrup from, actually.
Yeah.
So,
No wonder you can make syrup. That's a really big one.
while we're on the topic of leaves, I was reading a little bit more about leaves. And one fact, maybe I'll look this up and say it in the outro. If I don't, you can Google it, audience. But I was curious about just how many leaves fall every year, right? Can I find any quantification? But it has to be a lot. And it's a pretty amazing, cycle of adding material back into the earth every year, and how important that is for various life cycles and things. And let me unlock my phone. I have my hands covered in moss, so hopefully I can unlock my phone. Okay. I wrote down from this article in the Toronto Star that was called "Why Leaves Fall and the Good Deeds They Do" by Mark and Ben Cullen. And first they talked about the color and why that happens. That's where I read that. Cool. But then they talked about 5 other things that leaves are for, and they're all kind of related. First one is carbon. And so actually that reminds me, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about this fire we have here too. Karla, don't answer this because I know you definitely know the answer. But it's one of those
Wow,
things,
okay.
it's one of those things. This is a question for you, Rebecca. It's one of those things that is, it's obvious once you know it or even consider it, but it's not always obvious. And the question is, a big tree like this maple here, it's 30 feet tall, 40 feet tall maybe. Where does all that mass come from? That tree weighs tons. Where did it get that material to get that big?
Wow. I mean, probably from its leaves that had fallen the previous year, maybe returning some of the nutrients to the soil.
But how can it get bigger if that's the case?
Oh man, you've got me.
So
I have
this is
no
one of those
idea.
things. And so then once you get it, it's so obvious. It's the air.
Oh yeah.
So that process of
course.
photosynthesis,
That
turning
makes sense.
CO2,
Yep.
the tree is fixing that carbon into wood and also leaves, right? And
yep.
so what an amazing process to bring air and turn it into something so massive and huge.
Awesome.
And then also just the amount of carbon just in the leaves that fall every year. I wonder how many pounds of leaf this one tree can create every year. So the carbon is interesting, and that's we're talking about climate and climate change, and trees can't be the perfect solution, but more trees is good for getting carbon out of the atmosphere. The next thing it mentioned is soil. In a forest, a massive component of soil is leaves.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that material going back in the soil. Then it mentioned, which is a little bit more in the gardener's life, it's 2 things, mulch and compost. So you can use leaves as mulch. Mulch is a way to keep the soil from evaporating moisture,
Yep.
and keep things nice and tidy in your soil. And then also you can add it to your compost. If you don't add too much, you got to watch your browns versus greens,
Right.
Which we haven't talked too much about compost on this podcast. But
See,
anyway,
yeah, we don't watch our browns versus green.
and
in
I
my
don't really
compost.
either. But you don't want to just put only leaves
yeah,
in,
you're
or it might
right.
take a very, very long
Yeah,
time.
it
Just
would
like you
take
think
a
of
while
a
to break
forest
down.
floor. A forest floor
Exactly.
takes a long time to break down.
Yeah.
But it's really good material for compost. And then the last thing, which this is something that Karla inspired me last year, she was like, can we be careful and not rake up all the leaves or leave some leaves in place, because they're such an important source of microbial life.
Yeah.
And insects and things like that, in those layers and layers of leaves. And so many people in so many places rake up all their leaves, stuff them in bags, and then ship them to the dump.
Gone.
Right?
Exactly.
And it's it's this amazing resource for your own compost, your own mulch, your own soil, and also for all the microbes that make your soil healthy. So it's a wealth of a resource. We can't eat the leaves,
Right.
but we can eat the things that the leaves sustain. So
Exactly.
I was thinking about leaves and fall, and that's the little journey I went on.
Yeah, Brian, actually, my husband was reading about leaves, and he found that there's a recommendation. If you can mulch your leaves. Yeah. So we're going to try to just leave, some of them, because we get a lot.
Yeah.
But we'll leave some of them and just try mowing over them. And he's like, they'll just get cut up by the mower, and then you just leave them and
That's
right.
what I've done that. I've never bagged up my leaves here.
See.
And if you mow them, it's amazing how quickly they're gone.
Yeah.
If you don't mow them, they get matted and they get no oxygen between them,
Yeah.
and then they can form this really thick, slippery thing.
Yeah.
And that's not
That's great too for certain creatures.
true.
Sure.
But you don't want to be slipping on.
Right.
So as I was saying, that's that slimy layer is good too for certain creatures, but you don't want to kind of be slipping on that because it does get very slippery and you'll kind of fall and break something. But yeah, like if you live it in leave such layers in like a shady corner where you don't really go, then it can just kind of do its own thing.
Yeah. And then if you do mulch it, it's gone. It goes into the soil. And so like this huge tree, all of those leaves get processed in a year, which is really amazing by like the natural process. I'm gonna have another piece.
Yeah, please. Yeah, keep eating figs.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure where to put them.
So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I guess I have another thing about leaves.
Yeah.
Like I was thinking about how I love to identify, just identifying different trees, and it's kind of a journey to figure out, because most of us know the difference between like a maple and an oak. But then there's all these other trees, like, so the fall is a really interesting time because I kind of notice that, the same species of tree will change color together. So now I'm starting to figure out like, oh, there's these hickories that are these like this beautiful golden yellow color right now. So looking at the forest behind our house, or even like, at the park that I drive by a lot, I'm like, oh yeah, look at all those hickories. Cool. Just becoming more aware of different kinds of trees.
Yeah, that's cool. They at this time of year, the tree of identification is nice because they kind of pop out at you in groups.
Yeah.
I noticed the hickories just the other day. I was like, oh, yeah, that's a hickory. Okay.
Yeah.
yeah. No, I've actually I really like identifying trees. It's difficult as the leaves fall. I can only identify the ones where, it's a maple, an ash, or a dogwood, because those are the ones that grow parallel instead of alternate. So those are easier to identify, but the rest, without the leaves, I have no idea.
But a good tip if you're looking at a tree and the leaves have already fallen, so a little bit late fall into early winter, a good tip for tree identification is just to look down on the ground and pick the leaves up. And you are going to get some mix, but whatever's the predominant thing, you can be like, because bark can be difficult to analyze, but
tricky.
if you looked at something, I think some people miss is like, oh yeah, go look at the fallen leaves and see what's there. So
actually, that was one of the things that we were nerding out about when we were going on a walk like a couple of days ago. We were like, oh, this maple turned bright red immediately, and this other maple didn't. And we were like, why? And then we realized, oh, it's because one is a Norway maple and the other one's a red maple. Yep. So they will have like different times.
They look pretty similar.
The only way we could tell is because of the bark.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of fun.
Cool.
So I was just like, yep. That's fun.
There you go. Another little leaf tidbit that's kind of fun. We when I explore the woods with my daughter, we have this little nature book that we use. We used it a lot when she was like 2 and 3.
Karla almost dropped a thing, but safe.
Oh no,
safe.
Almost lost it. We use this nature book a lot when she was like 2 and 3 years old, and it has some plants in it, but not everything. Just kind of a basic, So it has 2 oak leaves in the book, and it's like a black oak and a white oak. And so the difference is the black oak has little points, whereas the white oak, the little fingers are rounded at the ends.
Is that you sure it's not red oak versus white oak?
See, then I was like, okay,
there
black
is a black oak, but
black
it's a
oaks
bit
and white oaks.
more rare, I think.
But then I was like, oh, my aunt and uncle were like, oh yeah, there's also pin oaks. And I was like, what? There's more? And then I looked in my yard recently, and it was a southern red oak. I was like, okay, there's red oaks. So there's so many species of oaks. So I'm just scratching the surface of identifying them.
The tricky one is the willow oak.
Yeah, that one's cool.
Its leaves don't look like a classic oak leaf. They look like little thin ones. So that's interesting. So speaking of oak, this fire we have going here is it took me a while to identify this.
Okay.
I'm not going to go into the whole story of how I had this pile of wood chips and logs delivered to my house because it's a long one. But this is a tree that was cut down in somewhere near in someone's neighborhood, and I was able to like salvage it from the chipping company or from the wood, the tree company.
Oh, nice.
And most of it was one tree. And it took me a while to identify. I was like, I'm pretty sure it's an oak, but what is it? And eventually I found some leaves in the detritus, and I was able to pretty sure that this is pin oak.
Okay.
Which is,
great.
I think, more closely related to red oak.
Okay.
Except it has much deeper lobing in the leaves and sharper points than even a red oak. And that's, I think, a pin oak. I think maybe some people say it's a kind of red oak. Don't quote me on that. But that that's. This is maybe, on the border of fall and winter we're talking about here, but we're having a fire, so I thought I'd talk about wood, burning wood, and that amazing process of, we talked about how the tree turns sunlight and CO2, and it captures it, and it turns into this massive, huge thing. And then when you burn wood, you're kind of releasing that solar energy again.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. And it's one of those things that, in the case of this tree, because it was already being cut down and we're burning it to cook food, this is probably a pretty carbon neutral activity. However, it won't be truly carbon neutral for like 100 years, because that's how old this tree was, right? So there's some considerations.
Right.
Burning wood can be a carbon neutral activity, and especially if you're burning a tree that was already going to be cut down, it's already going to release its carbon into the air. But there are some places where people cut down trees just to burn them, and entire places to burn. And then the calculus changes quite rapidly, and I feel like a lot of people have the calculus of like, well, it's wood, it's going to grow back, it's carbon neutral, but that's not always the case. First of all, it's a time period. There's a bird in the bush. There's a time period for how long the tree takes to grow, which that can be a very long time. But also, if you cut down a whole forest, there's so much carbon in the soil and in the leaves and things like that doesn't come back very fast at all. So I think my main takeaway is like burning wood is something that people need to do, and in some cases it's definitely way better than I do think making quesadillas here and tortillas on my wood burning stove is probably a more carbon neutral activity in this specific case than doing it on a gas stove. But there are some cases, depending on the source of that wood, where the actual calculus may not be the same. So I've been thinking about burning wood lately, and like where we fit in. But it's interesting, and it's just nice to know that where I think honoring the work that this tree did of capturing all that fire, and we're putting that energy back into something we're going to consume, which is, I think, kind of a beautiful process.
Nice. My uncle lives out in like western Loudoun County, so out in the country, and they have a huge forest area behind their house. So he'll actually identify trees that are like looking like they're about to die and kind of like quarter them off so they dry out a little bit, and then cut those down. And he ends up heating his house mostly with wood, almost the entire winter. But yeah, he's gone through like a careful process of identifying, which ones are appropriate to take. Right. He's even like taken some of the trees that are like the more invasive kinds, and getting he prepares them to cut them so they can dry out a little bit and actually burn well.
Yeah, that's a great thought. It's like I think when we're thinking about how we use any natural resources, it's easy to try to like oversimplify it. And just the idea that like wood is carbon neutral, it's much more complicated than that. And that just comes down to our human ideas of like oversimplifying, which we've talked about a lot. It's similar to how we deal with corn and overgrow corn because it's a good food, and soy is like that. I think thinking of wood like that. But if you're considerate, I think like your uncle says, and thinking about how the natural processes work, and there is resources in the forest that are usable, and there's some that need to stay in the forest. It's a good way to go. Yeah.
If you haven't read The Lorax by Dr. Seuss, that will help understand the concept.
Absolutely. I don't want to interrupt your paper there. No. What do you've got? Have you got any other things? Actually,
that was about. We kind of like touched on everything, cool. So I don't think I have. I don't really have more. That's about it. We talked about white and black oaks and how many other kinds of oaks. Do you want me to read out some of the other kinds of oaks?
Yeah, let's hear a list of oaks. Yes.
Okay, so I did a little research on, this was just on iNaturalist. I was just looking for native trees of Virginia, and then I searched for oaks. So there's not just black, white, pin, and southern red oak. There's chestnut oak, post oak, swamp chestnut oak, southern live oak, northern red oak, laurel oak, blackjack oak, water oak, and willow oak. and there are probably even more than those. I don't know if it's an exhaustive list, but yeah. So many oaks.
That's so cool. The one oak fact that I have in my brain is I know that the Latin name for the genus is Quercus.
Oh,
Quercus. It's
that's
a good
excellent.
name. Yeah.
Good. I like that.
Carla, do you have anything else to add about fall and plants?
No, that was it for me. I just, was thinking about pumpkins and the changing of the leaves, which are very, quintessential fall things. But yeah, that's
Absolutely.
all.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so we planted pumpkins, and we had two pumpkins, two small ones, one big one, and we carved a big one into Jack-o'-lantern, and we named it Zachy, and then we made the little pumpkins the feet of Jack-o'-lantern.
My guests on this episode of Rootbound were Karla Arias and Rebecca Uri, who you can listen to on the Mint and Elderflower episodes of the podcast, respectively. Check them out. Also featuring first-time podcaster Maya. Rootbound is hosted by Steve Ellington, who could not figure out how many leaves fall in the United States or in the world in general, but it's a whole lot. Music by Christian Quigascota. Fake ads by David Lonnie. Rootbound is a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside, but if you can go outside, enjoy the autumn. It really is orange as heck.
Autumn! The disyllabic man's fall. Yeah.